Step into love like you've never been hurt before. Step into trust like you've never been burned before.
Hello and welcome to Braveheart Conversations,
where we learn the art of love through brave and compassionate conversations. I am Jillian Landis.
and I'm Marie Wallace.
And we are your hosts today. Hello everyone. Today we are going to be talking about the difference between compassion and disempowerment. So sometimes we have this idea that if someone has gone through something really difficult, we feel grief for them, we feel sadness for them, but sometimes that can turn into disempowerment. That can turn into a message saying you have this disease or this problem or this situation that affected you, and therefore now you're crippled for life.
Mm-hmm. It's a friend of mine in a women's group had talked about a situation where someone had an illness, and the doctor had made it sound like there was no option but for her to go down this road, that it was it sounded like a life sentence. And the other person was a medical person, and she said, just so you know the difference, it's a diagnosis. It's not a termination slip. I'm not sure what you would call that, what we'd call that, but basically it's a diagnosis. It means that you can do something about it.
You aren't your diagnosis.
You aren't
have
your
a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that although it can be really helpful to identify a problem, which is what a diagnosis is meant to do, right? Mm-hmm. It's meant to be something to empower you to fix it and solve it. But often I think what happens is it becomes disempowering because it can become a label to say, I can't.
Yeah, label was what I was looking for. It's an indicator that something's wrong. Just like you take a test for a blood test, right? It says, oh, this indicates that you need to take care of this, this, and this. And there are tools. It doesn't mean that it's, terminal, or that you don't have choices in the matter.
Right. And working in the mental health field for a long time, I've seen kind of both sides of the spectrum, where sometimes you'll have somebody that's doesn't have any compassion, and it's like, no, you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get up and figure it out. And then there's the opposite end of the spectrum, where there's so much coddling and compassion that it actually disempowers the person and keeps them stuck. And so the relationship aspect of this, for me, the component in my life that this has been really powerful for me, is I'm often in a caregiving role, or I experience people around me who struggle with diseases and difficult situations, and how do I hold that space for them where it's both empowering and compassionate. That's really important for me.
It's a fragile line.
Yeah, so the message that I have compassion for the disease that you have, or the problem that you're experiencing, and I grieve that, whatever that loss is for you, and I believe that you have the power in you to overcome that.
Yes. I think those words are so important. I believe in you is a very empowering statement. And I grieve. That allows them to see that it does, affect you, and you do care without muddying the waters and holding them small, or in a place that doesn't empower them, doesn't allow them to look for other choices. I think when we hold someone in that position and we don't offer them, I believe you have that power, then we're also saying there are no choices.
Right.
And it doesn't, we won't even actively look for another option, because we've already decided our fate, or already decided that this is the way it's going to be. And then our brain doesn't even work on what are some possibilities to either get out of a situation, or work on my health, or whatever the situation is. my brain can actively seek other options and opportunities to make that situation better if I'm not holding them small.
Right. I like that phrase, holding them small.
Yeah, I do too.
So I think, yeah, there's two different paths that my brain takes when I'm thinking of somebody who's been diagnosed with something that's been traumatic or hard for them. One is for the actual person, like what are you getting out of this? Like, what's your motivation moving forward? Sometimes we can either be empowered and motivated to overcome whatever our diagnosis is, whatever our problem is. But sometimes it becomes an escape to actually deal with whatever your internal growth could be. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it's really important to develop some self-awareness to know, what am I getting out of this if I am using this diagnosis to keep me small? Like, what am I getting out of that? What am I afraid of?
I was going to say fear is the big motivator in that.
Sometimes we're afraid of success, or we're afraid of failure. And so if we have something that's kind of an excuse why we can't try, then that can be a huge barrier.
Afraid of letting someone down.
Yeah. And then the other piece for me is not the person, but the person who's doing the diagnosing or the caregiver after the fact is this is a role that I know really well, and I think that there is also a payoff that we need to be really careful about, that we can easily be meeting a need for power or being a savior or some other codependent role by keeping somebody else small.
Martyrdom.
Yeah, so if somebody else is dependent on me to solve their problem and I'm in the trenches with them, there's an unhealthy payoff. And I may think that I am being helpful and look at me, I'm so good-hearted and I sacrifice all this time and energy to help this person, and in reality I'm actually hurting them more because I'm disempowering them and keeping them small, and maybe some level of comfort, but not in a healthy way.
Not in a healthy way. Well, that's the martyrdom part as well, as just definitely not healthy for either party, because the caregiver can get overwhelmed and resentful, and that's not fair to whom they're giving care to. Vice versa, it's just seems like a tragic situation with a dark cloud going over both people all the time, or a family, because I've seen it with families as well, where the whole family is suffering because they're not getting that opportunity to get past the person who needs that much attention. So. Yeah,
and I think so far I've talked mostly about like medical diagnoses or mental health, but this can also apply. I know for me this was really huge in like codependent relationships. I think the most helpful thing that ever happened for me is that when I was just starting my journey of recovery, and it was really a like, woe is me, look at how awful all these people are in my life and how they're mistreating me.
Nobody likes me.
And the best thing that anybody ever said to me was, you're not a hostage. Nobody is tying you down to a chair and saying you must stay in this relationship. And so was that an empathetic response? No, but it was exactly what I needed. It was the truth. And that was empowering for me to make a change because I was able to see choice.
One could argue it might have been empathetic if they've been in that spot and knew that was the exact thing that you would need.
Yeah, but it wasn't like feeling into, like, when I think of empathy, it's putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and being able to feel their emotions. And it wasn't a touchy-feely. Like, it wasn't a,
you needed the
I'm
shock.
so sorry for you. Yeah, and I think I had gotten plenty of that, oh, I'm so sorry for you. Yes, they're such an asshole, and all that validation. That wasn't what I needed. That wasn't helping my situation. That only served to give more of my power away. And I think this very often happens in victim situations where and it could be a horrible tragedy or crime. It could be somebody who's a victim of a rape, and if you continue to tell that person that that your healing is at the mercy of what this person, if they apologize to you or they make amends, or you're never at the mercy of somebody else. Your healing.
Well, it goes with divorce, domestic violence, families, rivalry. It follows all of those. Anytime we are not sovereign in our own in our own power, we are giving it away.
Yes. Yeah, so I think across the board this applies to
every relationship.
Relationships and labels. We just have to be so careful about whatever label, whether it's a mental illness label, a victim label. I also, we've talked about before, the term narcissist is thrown around a lot. I'm in a relationship with a narcissist. Okay, but that doesn't make you a powerless victim, right? You're not helpless. You have a part too. What are you allowing? You're not tied to that chair.
You're not tied to the chair. And I think a compassionate thing is to feel with them, like you said, or the empathetic is to be in their shoes and maybe be aware of what a next step could be. We don't have to, but it could be that we empower them by saying, now what? It's sad, it's terrible, it's awful, it should have never happened, but life throws us those curveballs. And after a while, like allowing them to grieve, because we do need to go through those processes. But after a while, it's like, okay, so now what? What's an action forward? What's one little step you can take that will move you forward from this, that allows you to not hold yourself, because we hold ourselves small too.
Yes.
We hold ourselves in that place of, I can't do anything. It's impossible. We can't see any possibilities, and we hold ourselves there. So, as it may be a now what, or a little phrase that says, what was yours that I thought you just said one, where she said, no one's holding you to the chair.
Yeah.
You're not chained there.
Yeah, we're not stuck. We may feel stuck, but we are not stuck. We have choice. Something that I really like, I think, is another Brene Brownism, because I use this all the time.
I love her.
But she talks about writing the ending to your story.
Yes.
And so, you can still acknowledge what happened and still have compassion and empathy and grief for whatever just took place. And you decide when you write the ending to that story and move forward. That story can linger on and dictate.
And if you don't like that ending, you can choose another ending.
That's right. You're holding the pen.
Yes.
Nobody else is holding the pen.
No one.
So, that's a huge, huge lesson. I'm kind of feeling into wanting to talk about suicidality. This is something that's come up for me recently. It's so tricky to deal with people who have really significant mental illness, and this is something that isn't often talked about from the caregiver perspective, versus we do see a lot of help and resources out there for people struggling with suicidal thoughts. But what about the caregivers and the people on the other side who it's so tricky to navigate those situations? And I often will hear of parents who have a child that struggles with suicidal thoughts, or a friend, and how do you support them? And I think this is a really tricky area where it is easy to fall into disempowerment. It's really easy to fall into this area of fear. Like, I'm so afraid of what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. But they're at choice as well. Mm-hmm. Our family dealt with a suicide and of a very close family member, and it was really difficult to navigate. But the bottom line is, it was their choice. Mm-hmm. There was, because you can go back and you can redo the dialogue and the events and go, well, what if I had done this, or what if I had said this, or what if it's not a deciding factor.
Right.
It's still a person who made a choice, and we have to respect that choice, whether we agree with it or not, which happens in a lot of situations in relationships. We don't agree with the choice, but honestly, in the end, there's nothing that we could have said or done that would have made it. Sometimes it's a snap decision. And fortunately, I was going through a trauma school at the time that it happened, and the instructor said it's not that they want to die. Mm-hmm. They just don't know what they want to live for. Mm-hmm. And that allows us to know that we don't know
right.
where that or when or the circumstances that decision was made. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's a snap decision. Mm-hmm. Again, like you said, it's a mental illness that you don't. But I have to be... A good thing for me is to say that I did what I could when I could, mm-hmm. and then the rest is someone else's choice.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think this is super important in talking about empowerment or disempowerment. Mm-hmm. When you have a loved one, and this is an extreme case, there are a lot of, there's such a wide spectrum sure. of illness or mental illness, but this is something that I think people struggle with managing, and there is some possible guilt of, what if I didn't intervene? Mm-hmm. And I do think that in some cases detachment feels more easy, right? Mm-hmm. But it feels really vulnerable when it's like, I've held space for this person mm-hmm. who is struggling. And sometimes, I've seen many cases where it's chronic, mm-hmm. constantly thinking of committing suicide. And it's very tough to be on the other side of that, watching that. But being able to just hold space for their grief and not taking it on and mm-hmm. Not making it my responsibility to solve that, being in a supportive space of what can I do for you, mm-hmm. Which is a beautiful question mm-hmm. to me, because it really still empowers them, puts the ball back in their court of identifying what they need instead of me just throwing a whole bunch of solutions mm-hmm. at a problem, where I'm kind of taking away their dignity to solve that Agreed. Problem. But if I can ask them, how can I support you best? And a lot of times you don't get an answer, mm-hmm. And that's okay. And there is no magic answer to make them.
And there are some situations you aren't able to help mm-hmm. in the way that they need you to help as well.
Yeah, and then that is the ultimate difficult conclusion, is mm-hmm. they might take their life. Mm-hmm. They might do that. And that's okay too. Mm-hmm. And that's super, super tough. But at the end of the day, that's not my choice. Mm-hmm. I don't get to make that choice for somebody else. Mm-hmm. And it's still a valid option for somebody to say, I'm done. Mm-hmm. There's nobody that's going to make that not an option, as much as we mm-hmm. may want to make them stay. Mm-hmm. But it's not our choice.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's a hard one. That's a really hard one.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think that everyone has choice and autonomy, mm-hmm. no matter what their struggle is. So no matter what their illness is, their mental illness, their physical illness, their history of victimization, we may not have been able to choose whatever happened to us, but we do have the responsibility of our recovery, seeking our recovery. And this came to be really apparent to me when I watched a lot of loved ones struggling with addiction. And I do believe that that is a disease. I do believe that it's a sickness. And it was devastating to watch. And I didn't think that they chose that lifestyle. But I do think that they had the responsibility to choose the path of recovery. And that's the same for all of us.
However, there is a lot of medical involved in addiction as well, where we think someone has the choice. And it's, let's see, how do I want to say that? For some people in addictive situations, they can make that choice and be done, right? It's really simple and easy for them. They've come to a point in their life where the loss is greater than the addiction. However, I just know that medically, for some people, it's a lot harder than a choice, if that makes sense.
Well, and I think it depends on the person too, and at some point there is a much bigger loss of control. So I've watched people, or at least like I've been around a lot of recovery or lack thereof.
Me too.
And I've seen situations where people drink themselves to death and they don't ever get the consequences. I mean, they've gotten the consequences, but they never changed their behavior, because that's where I do see the line of disease versus choice, where, you know, so the big book of AA shares a story that I think is pretty powerful, where there's a man who has an addiction to jaywalking.
Okay. I didn't know it was a thing.
And so he makes it across the road multiple times, no big deal. For a while, he just runs across the street, and there might be a car that gets pissed off, but it's all good. Well, and then he starts getting a little bit injured. He breaks his arm, and then he heals, and he runs right back out and breaks his leg, and then he heals and runs right back out and breaks his back, and then he heals and he runs out in front of a train.
Oh dear.
And the idea is that no sane person behaves this way. And I feel like that story is very powerful to me in viewing addiction in a similar way, that they have all of these horrible things that happen, and they run right back out in front of a vehicle. And it's completely irrational behavior because they're not being governed by logic. They're not being governed by, their brain is offline.
Their brain, I like that. Their brain is offline. I don't like that their brain is offline. I like that that you say that. It makes a visual picture of why it's very difficult to do.
Yeah. And so I don't think that there is no answer. I've seen a lot of people recover and recover successfully, and live really vibrant lives. But as is so many things, like the first step is acceptance. Yes, I have this problem, whether it's addiction or it's mental illness or I was victimized. I have this trauma now. It is acceptance.
You have to acknowledge it, yes.
Yeah, acceptance of these things, awareness of how they did harm me or are harming me, and then moving forward to the choice part. I may not have had choice
when this happened.
Yeah, how these things developed. But I do have choice moving forward how I'm going to seek help. Because very often when I see people really struggle, it's because they are isolating. There's shame because, all of these things, they create shame. I have this mental illness, I have this addiction, I have this, pattern or this trauma.
My
It's
unworthiness
shameful.
caused this. Mm-hmm.
And so it's isolating, and then it's very, very tough to reach out for help. But that is where we have choice. That is where we have the ability to make a difference in our recovery and moving forward and writing a different ending.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. We have the pen.
We have the pen. We always have the pen.
We always have the pen.
And every time you think you don't, you are wrong.
You are wrong. True.
So I think, as someone looking in on the outside, and maybe somebody that has a partner or a friend or a child or someone close in their life that's struggling with any of these things, how do we empower them most? And yes, it is empathy, and it is grieving with them, and it is acknowledging the problem for sure. But it's also and you can still overcome this, and you still have choice.
And support will support you. But I think it's also, the other part of it is in the caregiving role, reminding ourselves as caregivers that we also have choice.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we do these things, and we've been used to being in a caregiving role and think that there's no other options out there. So we've allowed that to continue too without getting the help. So I think it's both roles, where sometimes the caregiver, because I've seen and heard stories of caregivers who've lost everything in that role of caregiving, not seeking other help or other. So know that there are sources and resources out there for you to get the support you need as a caregiver, as well as the victim person. Because sometimes we focus on that victim so much, we forget that the caregiver needs the support as well from our community.
So true.
Too.
And I love that you're bringing this up too, because sometimes it's appropriate to have, sometimes that's a season. Sometimes we get to help.
Yes.
And
it's a
be
season.
a support and hold space, and sometimes that ends. And sometimes it's time to say, maybe they're entrenched in their own disempowerment and don't accept any choice or responsibility, and they become a drain. And sometimes it's absolutely the most loving thing to do to let them go.
For their own health as well, their own mental health and emotional health and physical health even, because there's only so much you can do, and the caregiver still has their own life to live and to be part of. And I like that you said there's a season, so that it allows the caregiver not to have as much guilt.
Yeah.
Because there is a little, especially when family's involved. I've seen that happen with some family members. I know someone who was a caregiver for an in-law for a long, long time and lost everything. And so obviously at that point, she needed help and didn't get it. And her own life and health suffered from it.
Yeah.
And so at that point, just thinking about the caregiver, as well as the victim in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is something I'm certainly it's not a foreign experience to me. So when years ago I was in a relationship with an addict, this was a huge, huge lesson for me when I just was pretty new in my recovery. I was terrified of letting this relationship go. I had been in a caregiver role for a couple of years. I was taking care of all of his needs, shelter, food, all the basic needs. And I was very resentful and felt very sucked dry, and I was terrified of letting him go because I was afraid of what would happen. I was afraid of him committing suicide. I was afraid of him being homeless and getting into trouble. And And I did eventually face those fears and let him go. And he did do all those things.
Aww.
He did attempt suicide. He did get into, legal trouble and was on the street for a while. But the miracle in that story is that a year or two later, he was functioning well, managing a restaurant and, living life. Mm-hmm. And it was such an important closure for me to realize, wow, getting out of the way, even though, there's a lot of turmoil that can happen, ultimately that was in his best interest.
Because he could have stayed in that same cycle over and over again, as well as you.
Yep.
Because it wasn't healthy for you in that situation.
No, it was
either.
disempowering for both of us. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've been in that situation as well. It's not healthy for anyone in that.
No. And so, you take a risk. You take a risk that something might go wrong, but
and you might lose a relationship too, because that's also a fear of ours is losing a relationship, and it might be the most loving, kind thing is losing that relationship.
Yes.
It's sad, but
But, we're here for growth, right? That's our purpose. We're here to grow and learn. And so if we're ever standing in the way of that for someone, we're not honoring them.
Well, and if you find yourself in that cycle, if you find that you're not moving forward, right, then you know that there's something that you get to do or change or move to get out of that and move forward.
Yeah.
And so if you ever feel like there is no choice, that's the exact time to sit down and go, okay, there's got to be something else, and start getting creative and refocusing would be a good thing to do in that respect, is focusing on some way to get out of that cycle. One tiny movement. This is kind of a plug for Women Ignite, but they have that make one change. It's exactly that. It's one change can really make a huge difference.
Yes.
It might be a bigger change than you want.
Yes.
but it always, that movement forward allows things to be a lot healthier.
Yeah, and that was certainly true for me. It started with small steps, setting boundaries that felt like big mountains to me. Looking back, I'm like, oh my Lord, how is that even hard?
It was really little compared to...
But, it is starting small and, setting boundaries and honoring yourself one little piece at a time, and honoring them a little better. And then sometimes that does eventually lead to stepping away from a relationship, or saying, this is not, this caregiving role isn't honoring for either one of us, and I'm going to let you go, and I have no ability to determine how that's going to play out for you, and if you're going to step into your power and take control of your choices, or if you'll continue to be at the mercy of whatever the thing is, the label, the addiction, the relationship, whatever.
And just send them with love and blessings, so that I think that's the most honoring thing. So our bottom line is we're all at choice, the caregiver and the person going through the trauma or the mental illness or the disease. We're all at choice.
Yes.
100% always. Responsible for ourselves.
Yes, and so we're responsible to do the most honoring and caring thing, which is very tough a lot of the time. It's not often what we think it is. Sometimes we stay in relationships and helping and taking over things that aren't really our business. And we think that that's loving, but that's actually very disempowering and dishonoring in most cases.
And it may be considered selfish by some.
Absolutely.
But it's absolutely important sometimes to be selfish in a way that is loving and compassionate to all, all involved.
Yeah, I often like to say selfish empowers me to be the most loving version of myself. Because I do think, when I honor me, I honor other people. And if I am compromising my own values if I'm compromising myself in a relationship, I don't show up as a very loving person. It shows up as resentment. And
Definitely as resentment.
Yeah. And that's not a very loving version of me.
Nope.
I don't really care for that version
Me
of me
either.
when it shows
Me
up.
either. I want to be that loving person.
I prefer to show up in honor. And to me today, my truth is that is the highest version of love I could give anyone.
Yes.
So.
Well, it's also being a role model, an example for them, what it could look like to honor yourself.
Yes, absolutely, because that's often what we're trying to ram down their throat is love yourself better, right? And then we're being a terrible example.
If you would just, it's kind of like when I was teaching, they said, if you could just open up their head and stuff it in.
But you know, that's another piece is like really stepping out of that arrogance to say, I don't know what's right for you. I don't know what your path looks like. I don't have the answers for you. And because that really is so arrogant to think that we know best for everybody else. I really don't. You know, using might be a vital piece of somebody's journey. And if they're not done with that piece, like who am I to say that they have to be done with that piece?
Well, we don't know the big plan either for anybody.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what's right for other people, but I was given intuition and feelings and a connection with a higher power to guide me in knowing what's right for me.
Exactly.
And that doesn't involve suffering for somebody else's illness.
Exactly. Well said.
Yeah. Well, I think this has been a really awesome
great
episode. I'm really glad that we were able to talk about some...
Me too.
Yeah, some
awesome.
of those things that have been kicking around in my head for sure is, sometimes when our helping becomes really disempowering. But I really do believe that empowerment and compassion coexist well together.
They do.
Yeah. So thank you, Marie.
Thank you, Jill.
Appreciate you sharing with us your juicy tidbits. If you are listening today and you have any questions or comments about what we've spoken about, please email Marie or myself. You can contact me at defytheaverage@gmail.com.
And me at mariesgold.com.
And we'd love to hear about any other relationship conflicts or situations that you have, questions that we might be able to answer on one of our next episodes. That would be great. So you're welcome to email in and be anonymous. So we look forward to hearing from you.
We know your questions are on someone's mind.
Yes.
If you have a question, you can guarantee someone else has it too.
We are all connected. This is true.
Connected.
When we share our stories, we really empower others to heal. So with that, we will wrap up and we will see you all next week.
Looking forward to it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.